There is a phrase that has come to strike fear into the hearts of city planners around the world. Day zero. It is the name given to the moment a major city runs out of water, the day the reservoirs fall so low that the taps must effectively be shut off and a modern metropolis is left without the most basic resource for human life. For years, day zero was something that happened somewhere else, in distant cities on other continents, a cautionary tale from far away. But now, in the state of Texas, a major American city has run the numbers on its own dwindling water supply, and the math has pointed to something almost unthinkable. Corpus Christi has been staring down the very real possibility of becoming one of the first major cities in the United States to face its own day zero. This is not a distant hypothetical or a doomsday fantasy. It is the sober result of arithmetic, of watching the water in the reservoirs decline, measuring the rate at which it is being used, and projecting forward to the point where the supply would simply run out. When a city does that math, and the answer comes back as a specific approaching date on which the water could be gone, it changes everything. It transforms an abstract worry into a countdown, a ticking clock that concentrates the mind and forces hard questions that can no longer be avoided. Corpus Christi hit that math, and in doing so, it became a stark warning for the entire country, a sign that day zero is no longer something that only happens to other people in other places. In this video, we are going to explore how a major American city came to the brink of running out of water. We will look at what day zero really means and where the idea came from. At the particular situation that left Corpus Christi so vulnerable, and at the reservoirs whose falling levels set the countdown in motion. We will examine the surprising and controversial factor that has made this crisis so much worse, the enormous demands placed on the city's water beyond the needs of its residents. We will consider the reprieve that recent events may have offered, and why it solves nothing in the long run. And we will ask what this alarming story tells us about the future of water in a warming, growing, and increasingly thirsty country. Stay with me, because the story of how an American city hit day zero math is a warning that reaches far beyond one city on the Texas coast. Hashtag, what day zero really means. To understand the gravity of what Corpus Christi has faced, you first have to understand the concept of day zero and why it inspires such dread. The term rose to global attention when a major city on another continent came terrifyingly close to running out of water during a severe drought, and officials there began counting down to the day when they would have to shut off the taps to homes and businesses and instead ration water out to residents at collection points. That prospect of a modern city of millions reduced to lining up for a daily allotment of water captured the world's attention and turned day zero into a symbol of what water scarcity could mean in the modern age. Day zero is not merely an inconvenience or a period of restrictions. It is the near total failure of a city's water system. The point at which the normal delivery of water through the taps can no longer be sustained because the source has run dry. It is the moment when a city can no longer meet the basic water needs of its people through ordinary means and must resort to emergency measures, drastic rationing, and desperate improvisation. For any modern city, it is close to a worst-case scenario. Because water underpins absolutely everything, not just drinking and bathing, but sanitation, firefighting, healthcare, industry, and the basic functioning of daily life. What made the concept so chilling was the realization that it was not confined to any one place or any one country. Any city that depends on a limited water supply and that faces the combination of drought, growth, and heavy demand could, in principle, reach its own day zero. The countdown is simply a matter of arithmetic, of how much water is left and how fast it is being drawn down. And when a place does that arithmetic honestly and finds that the lines cross at a date in the foreseeable future, the abstract danger becomes concrete and urgent. That is exactly the position in which Corpus Christi found itself. An American city forced to confront the possibility that its own day zero might not be far away. Hashtag, a city on the edge of scarcity. Corpus Christi sits on the coast of Texas, a significant city and a major industrial and shipping hub, a place of considerable economic importance to the state and the nation. But for all its coastal location, next to the vast waters of the sea, it faces a fundamental challenge that has haunted it for generations. The sea is saltwater, useless for drinking or most other purposes without expensive treatment, and the region around the city is prone to drought, a hot and often dry part of the country where rainfall can be unreliable and where long dry spells can grip the land. To supply itself with fresh water, the city relies heavily on a system of reservoirs, large artificial lakes created by damming rivers which capture and store the water that falls in the region so that it can be used through the dry times. These reservoirs are the heart of the city's water supply, the great tanks that hold the region's fresh water in reserve. In wet years, when the rains come and the rivers flow, the reservoirs fill and the city has a comfortable cushion. But in dry years, when the rains fail and the rivers run low, the reservoirs are not replenished, and the water stored within them is steadily drawn down without being refilled. And in a region prone to drought, dry years can come in long, punishing succession. This is the fundamental vulnerability at the center of the story. Corpus Christi depends on reservoirs that fill only when the rains cooperate, in a region where the rains often do not, and it must serve a growing population and a substantial industrial base from that limited and unreliable supply. When drought settles in and refuses to lift, the reservoirs begin their slow, steady decline. And there is little the city can do but watch the water fall and hope for rain. It is a precarious way to sustain a modern city, a bet on the weather that works until, one day, it does not. And in recent times, as drought has gripped the region and the reservoirs have fallen to alarming lows, that bet has come under more strain than ever before. #The reservoirs hit historic lows. The crisis reached its most frightening point as the city's reservoirs fell toward historic lows, the water within them dropping to levels rarely if ever seen before, a visible and measurable sign that the supply was running dangerously thin. As the drought persisted and the reservoirs went without adequate replenishment, the stored water was drawn down further and further, and the percentage of the reservoir's capacity that remained shrank toward frightening numbers. This was the raw material of the day zero math, the falling supply that, measured against the ongoing demand, produced a countdown to the point where the water could effectively run out. When water officials look at a situation like this, they do a kind of grim projection. They see how much water remains in the reservoirs. They measure how quickly it is being used, and they factor in expectations about how much, if any, is likely to be replenished. From this, they can estimate how long the supply will last, and they can identify the approximate date on which, if nothing changes, the reservoirs would fall to a level at which the city could no longer draw usable water from them. As the reservoirs hit their historic lows, that projected date, the city's own version of day zero, moved uncomfortably close, close enough to be measured in a manageable number of months and years, rather than in some distant, comfortable future. That is what it means to hit day zero math. It is the moment when the projection stops being reassuring and starts being alarming, when the lines on the chart, the falling supply, and the steady demand are seen to cross at a date that suddenly feels real and near. For the people of the city, it meant the imposition of increasingly strict water restrictions, limits on outdoor watering and other uses, as officials scrambled to slow the decline and stretch the remaining supply. And it meant a growing sense of anxiety, a recognition that the water they had always taken for granted was, in fact, finite and dwindling, and that without significant change or significant rain, the unthinkable could actually come to pass. But the falling reservoirs were only part of the story, because there was another factor driving the crisis, one that made it both worse and far more controversial. The industry that drinks the city's water here is the detail that transforms this from a simple story of drought into something far more complicated and contentious. Corpus Christi is not only a city of homes and residents, it is a major industrial center, home to a large concentration of heavy industry, including facilities that consume enormous quantities of water in their operations. And a very substantial share of the city's water does not go to its residents at all. It goes to industry. This is a crucial and often overlooked dimension of the crisis, because it means that the demand drawing down the reservoirs is driven heavily by industrial use, not just by the ordinary needs of the population. This creates a deeply uncomfortable situation. As the reservoirs fall and residents are asked to conserve, to limit their watering and cut back on their own use. An enormous portion of the water continues to flow to the industrial facilities that form the backbone of the local economy. For many residents, this feels like a profound unfairness, a sense that they are being asked to sacrifice, while industry continues to consume the lion's share of the dwindling supply. It raises pointed questions about priorities, about who the water is really for, and about whether it is right to court and sustain water-hungry industry in a place that is running short of water, and to keep supplying that industry even as the crisis deepens. At the same time, the industry is not simply a villain in this story. Those industrial facilities are a huge part of the local and regional economy, providing jobs, generating tax revenue, and contributing to the prosperity and importance of the city. They are woven into the fabric of the community and the economy in ways that cannot be easily undone. And the city, for its part, has actively encouraged industrial growth over the years, seeing it as a path to prosperity, which means the heavy industrial water demand is not an accident, but the product of deliberate choices. This is what makes the situation so fraught. The very industry that strains the water supply is also a pillar of the local economy, and disentangling the two or deciding how to balance their competing claims on a shrinking resource is an agonizingly difficult problem with no easy answer. Hashtag, how it came to this to understand how a major American city ended up doing day zero math, it helps to look at the deeper causes, the choices and conditions that combined to create the crisis. Because while the immediate trigger was drought, the vulnerability was built over a long time, the product of decisions and assumptions that left the city dangerously exposed. Part of the answer is the fundamental mismatch between the city's water supply and its ambitions. Corpus Christi and its region pursued growth, both in population and especially in water-intensive industry, building a demand for water that pressed hard against the limits of what its drought-prone, reservoir-dependent supply could reliably provide. When the good years came and the reservoirs were full, this seemed sustainable, but it left little margin for the bad years, so that when a serious and prolonged drought arrived, the gap between the demand the city had built and the supply the weather would provide became a crisis. There is also the broader failure to adequately plan for a future of greater water stress, to anticipate that drought could be more severe and more persistent, and to build in the reserves, alternative supplies, and safeguards that might have prevented the countdown from ever beginning. There is a lesson here that extends far beyond one city about the danger of building a modern economy and a growing population on a water supply that depends on cooperative weather, without adequate planning for the possibility that the weather will not cooperate. But the supply is not limitless, and in a world where droughts may be growing more severe, that assumption is a dangerous one. Corpus Christi's brush with day zero is, in large part, the bill coming due for years of building demand faster than the reliable supply could support. A reckoning that many other places may one day face as well. Hashtag a reprieve, but not a solution. As the crisis deepened and the countdown ticked closer, the city caught a break, the kind of break that a reservoir-dependent city can only pray for. The weather finally shifted, and significant rain and floodwater began to arrive, flowing into the depleted reservoirs and beginning to replenish the supply that had fallen so low. This influx of water pushed back the projected date of the crisis, buying the city precious time, delaying the moment of reckoning, and easing, at least for now, the immediate fear of the taps running dry. But it is crucial to understand that this reprieve, welcome as it is, does not solve the underlying problem. It merely postpones it. The fundamental vulnerability remains exactly as it was, a growing city with heavy industrial demand, dependent on drought-prone reservoirs, in a region where the rains cannot be relied upon. The floodwater that arrived to push back the countdown is a temporary gift from the weather, not a permanent fix. And the same weather that gave it can take it away again. When the next drought comes, and in this region it surely will, the reservoirs will begin to fall once more, and the day zero math will start ticking again from wherever the new water level leaves it. The reprieve buys time, but time is only valuable if it is used, if the city uses the breathing room to build genuine, lasting solutions rather than simply returning to business as usual and waiting for the next crisis. The real question is whether the city and the region will use the time they have been given to develop new and more reliable sources of water, to reduce and manage demand, and to plan honestly for a drier and more uncertain future. Or whether they will let the sense of urgency fade with the rising water and find themselves right back at the edge of day zero when the rains fail again. The math has not changed. It has only been paused. Hashtag, the warning for a thirsty nation. So, what does this story ultimately tell us, beyond the fate of one city on the Texas coast? It tells us that day zero is no longer a distant foreign concept, but a real and present danger that can reach a major American city, that the arithmetic of water scarcity can produce a countdown to catastrophe right here at home. And that is a warning that should resonate far beyond Corpus Christi, because the conditions that produced its crisis, drought, growth, heavy demand, and inadequate planning exist in many other places across a warming and thirsty nation. Across the country, and especially across the drier and faster-growing regions, cities and communities depend on water supplies that are under increasing strain. As populations grow, as industries expand, and as the climate grows more extreme and droughts more severe, the gap between what these places demand and what their water sources can reliably provide is likely to widen. Corpus Christi did the math and found its answer approaching, but it is far from the only place where the numbers could one day cross into danger. The ultimate lesson is that water can no longer be taken for granted, that the era of assuming the taps will always flow is coming to an end in many places, and that the time to prepare is before the countdown begins, not after. Corpus Christi's brush with day zero, and the temporary reprieve that followed, is an opportunity for the entire country to take heed, to recognize the vulnerability of water supplies that depend on cooperative weather, and to invest in the planning, the conservation, and the alternative sources that can prevent the countdown from ever reaching zero. The water flowed back into the reservoirs this time, and the immediate danger receded. But the deeper truth remains that a modern society is only ever as secure as its water supply, and in a drying world, that security can no longer be assumed. Corpus Christi hit day zero math, and whether it, and the many places like it, can find a way to change